Hello and welcome to Season 3 of the Push Podcast. My name's Jack Ferguson, an experienced brand strategist with a science background. In my career, I've worked across 25 industries and helped increase client and employer revenue by over $40 million. I will be your host. This season of the podcast is essential listening for marketers looking to better sell their strategies to stakeholders, get client buy-in, and keep internal teams engaged. Thanks for being here, and don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 60 of the Push Podcast. This episode is a solo episode, and it's where I'm going to be talking about what I believe to be the world's strongest brand. So a brand that survived bans, wars, culture shifts, and even algorithms. Of course, I'm talking about Christmas. You might think that Christmas is an absolute behemoth, that we don't have much to learn from it. But going through this process of researching this brand, although not a commercial brand, has given me tons of insights and given me tons of ideas. Bearing in mind that I'm going to be focusing on how Christmas got to where it was, not necessarily what it should do from now, even though no one owns it. Plenty of commercial brands have benefited, so we can look at what they've done and spark some ideas for ourselves. I want to talk about how both rituals and ritual systems have played a role in the brand growth of Christmas. The smaller brands can learn a lot from that. I want to talk about the way I believe a commercial brand did effectively partner with the concept of Christmas for enormous commercial benefits. And you might know who that brand is. If you know the history of Christmas somewhat, especially in the last 100 years or so, you'll know the brand that I'm talking about. The concept for the episode came about a while ago, so I was thinking about the traditions and rituals that reinforce Christmas. So the lights that people put up every year, the distance families travel to reunite on this day or at this time of year, the ritual of gift giving and thinking about something you could give to others. So a deep dive was always on the cards. I've uncovered a lot more than what I bargained for. My theory was that Christmas transcends cultures. Even people who don't celebrate it know what it is. It's unavoidable. It's reinforced everywhere. Everybody knows what Christmas looks like, what it smells like, what it tastes like, what it sounds like, and what it feels like. It's a true multi-sensory experience. So first, some numbers quickly is that global holiday retail sales in November and December of 2024 hit $1.2 trillion worldwide, and that doesn't even include hospitality and travel and all the other adjacent industries that, fair to say, are probably very invested in Christmas. It's fair to say the whole global economy is probably fairly invested in Christmas at this point. Between 2 to 2.6 billion people are thought to actively celebrate Christmas. That is a huge chunk of the worldwide population. The world population is about 8.25 billion, I believe, at the time of this recording. But they're also the recognition of Christmas cues or assets like Santa are high 90% recognition. And there's almost no brands or cultural artifacts with comparable reach. I mean, there's a few. We've got Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Nike a little bit further behind that. But it's truly one of the most recognized names, and Santa is one of the most recognized assets of a brand in the world. Coca-Cola is not far behind. In Western countries, it's almost thought to have basically 100% aided awareness. There's a study from YouGov that I'll link to in the description that reaffirms that. For McDonald's, Sponsorship Research International did a global survey in 1995, and they found that 88% of people worldwide could identify the golden arches, the M, McDonald's distinctive asset. And that was from a global sample. And that's quite a while ago now. That's about 30 years ago now. So that could be much higher now. Christmas Day is now a public holiday in over 100 countries, including some with minority Christian populations. Even in the Middle Eastern countries or in Southeast Asia, where you have a lot smaller Christian populations, it is still celebrated somewhat, even if not as much as Western countries. But I thought you can't really understand a brand until you look at the history of that brand. So if we're looking into the history of Christmas, I wanted to share some specific plot points from the past that give us an idea of how it got to where it is and actually tell the story of how it became what it's now become with this commercial global behemoth of a ritual that it now is. So it is quite a long-standing tradition now. It has been around since 336 AD. In Rome, the church officially began observing Christ's nativity on December 25th, 336 AD, during the time of Emperor Constantine's leadership during the Roman Empire. The theory at the time is that there was a lot of pagan celebrations happening at that time of year and other solstice rites. And so things like Saturnalia, Sol Invictus, and the Calends of January all were celebrated but didn't necessarily unite the Roman Empire. So at the time, approximately 10% of the population were Christian, and it's thought that Christmas was brought in to turn more people Christian and to better unite the Roman Empire. So by the middle of the 4th century, Christianity in the Roman Empire increased to around 56%. And then by the end of that century, so around 400 AD, it's starting to reach saturation and account for roughly 90% of the empire's population. So the celebration of Christmas then spread through the Roman Empire into Europe. And during this time was a very religious event, very connected specifically to Christianity. Christianity, being a monotheistic religion, did suit Constantine's plans of unifying the empire, because a single god's probably easier to unite people under than a range of gods. During a time of internal religious conflicts and civil wars, it makes a lot of sense from a strategic point of view. There's also the element of that his personal philosophy was Christianity as well. But for the purpose of brand, I'm focusing on when it was incepted and how the pagan celebrations were in effect interrupted, or there was this migration away from them towards the celebration of Christmas. Now, I think that's the most important plot point from a brand point of view, so I'll highlight that right now. We'll come back to that later in the episode. By the early Middle Ages, so Christmas was spreading, so it had established itself throughout Christian Europe. It wasn't just a solemn celebration, though. This was a raucous celebration in a lot of places. It effectively still had, or a lot of theories put it, that it still had the raucous spirit of the pagan festivals that in effect migrated over. And of course, if you have such a large amount of people celebrating something, you are going to have divergence within that celebration or within that ideology. There is some interesting celebrations that took place, one being the Feast of Fools, if you wanted to look that up online. I won't go into too much detail about it here, but it is quite interesting, and I will link to that. Also, the Feast of the Donkey. Now, replace donkey with the word ass, and that's what the celebration was called. I don't want to say it because I don't want to get cancelled, but it was actually about effectively celebrating donkeys. It wasn't about eating donkeys. It was just about celebrating them, and it was meant to be tongue-in-cheek, a joke. So they had a sense of humour. Some people did anyway. And I'm going to fast forward about 1,200 odd years in the 17th century. So Puritans were starting to view that Christmas was too tainted by paganism and by, let's say, improper merriment. It's an interesting from a brand heritage point of view, because regardless of whether the date of Christmas was invoked because of the surrounding celebrations, or if it was chosen or inspired by pure biblical rationale, it did start at the same time that those pagan celebrations were already in place. And it speaks to a concept, I think, with brand heritage that you often see arise, where there are aspects of your brand that you won't shed, parts of your brand that won't evolve. There's parts of your brand that can evolve, but there are parts that can't. There is DNA that cannot be changed. And for there to be a migration away from the pagan festivities to a more ecclesiastic celebrations, maybe something remained from the former. So in 1647 specifically, so in England, just prior to the leadership of Oliver Cromwell, Christmas was banned. So festivities were forbidden, churches were closed on December 25th, and it was treated as an ordinary workday at that time. And Oliver Cromwell's often credited with bringing in the ban. He didn't bring in the ban, he didn't initiate it, but he certainly drove it. So he's a powerful figurehead who supported it, enforced legislation, would send soldiers to break up illegal celebrations and seize food and whatnot. But Christmas was not to be denied. The ban provoked resistance among people who loved the holiday, and it was restored in England with the monarchy's return in 1660. So Charles II. But likewise in colonial New England, so the Puritans disapproved of Christmas celebrations there as well. And for example, the Massachusetts Bay Colony outlawed Christmas from 1659 to 1681. So anyone caught celebrating could be fined. It was heavily suppressed at that time. Now, bearing in mind that this is in the part of the world that we now call North America, but it was a collection of colonies at the time. The Declaration of Independence for America still was signed about 100 years later. So this influence is thought to have come from England because it was an English colony or part of the Great Britain Empire. But in America, or in the English colonies within what we now call America, only in the late 1680s did those colonies legalize Christmas again, and it started to grow as a celebration. But after the bans in both England and in the English colonies, or what we now call America, Christmas did remain relatively low-key through the 1700s, with less widespread jovial revelry and celebrations that it once had. And like any brand, but same with Christmas, it wasn't universally loved. So its acceptance would wax and wane over time with cultural and religious attitudes. And by the 18th century, even where it wasn't banned, Christmas had lost some prominence, so especially in Protestant regions. So if we think New England, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Scotland, some areas of Germany and the Netherlands, and even in parts of England still, surviving more in folk customs rather than a grand public festival. So it wasn't until the 1800s where it first experienced major return to glory, let's say, as a family-centred festive celebration. And a few factors are thought to have driven this revival. So one was literature. In 1843, it was English author Charles Dickens that published A Christmas Carol. So he wrote a story highlighting compassion, family, the spirit of Christmas, and it effectively is thought to have reinvented Christmas, or what I might call in brand terms a brand refresh. So more reshaping it into a time of benevolence and familial joy rather than sort of your revelry and your rowdy misrule and all the other things it had been thought to be over time. At the same time, Britain's young Queen Victoria and her German-born husband, Prince Albert, famously set up a decorated Christmas tree at Windsor Castle for the royal children, and that captured public's attention at the time and the public's imagination. So in 1848, this was circulated in the Illustrated London News, and it did inspire families across England and later America as well. But they started to decorate Christmas trees at home. So that ritual was in fact nurtured or pushed in the mid-1800s. Christmas cards were introduced in London a few years earlier. Christmas carols started to become popularised. Some were revived during this time, some were newly written. In the United States, which obviously was the United States in the mid-1800s, having signed their Declaration of Independence roughly 100 years beforehand, they didn't really have a strong Christmas tradition at the time, or at least in the early 19th century, but there was a growing enthusiasm for the holiday brewing in America as well. So writers like Washington Irving romanticized old Christmas customs, and by the 1860s, Christmas was becoming an American family holiday and one that was liked and loved at the time. The figure of Santa Claus, so he took shape in the 19th century as well. The 1823 poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, introduced a sleigh-riding St. Nick who would deliver toys. By 1870, Christmas Day had become a US federal holiday, so it was very much embedding itself in American culture at this time. And we can even think about it in the modern age where there is a lot of imagery about snowing, and even in Australia or in the Southern Hemisphere where it's not cold during Christmas, not cold at all, we still recognise that. But we can see from the roots of Christmas that it was very much a Northern Hemisphere incepted and pushed custom or ritual. And it wasn't just a ritual. Like by the late 19th century, it was starting to establish itself as a ritual system. So that involved your Christmas trees, cards, carols, Santa Claus, gift giving. There was a whole system formulating around the day, not just a single ritual. As we move into closer to the current age, so the 20th century is when it became more of a mass market phenomenon, and as well as a religious and cultural holiday as well. And it is still celebrated by many as a religious event. By others, it's more secular, and it's about family and getting together and gift giving and all the things that have already been mentioned. And it is by about early 1900s in Western economies, this is, that the shopping season was becoming deeply entrenched. So that time of year is when you went and bought tons of gifts, and where you'd buy things for other people. Department stores would have elaborate window displays, and holiday advertising did become ubiquitous. A lot of retailers would jump on board, and they would try and lure in crowds with Santa Claus appearances, festive decor, and later the launch of post-Thanksgiving Christmas shopping events. But what is particularly interesting around this time, if we're looking at the early 1900s, and what I did allude to earlier in the episode, is that the figure of Santa, so the asset being Santa, that I'm saying belongs to the brand of Christmas, is starting to become a global icon. And that's in large part due to advertising, specifically due to Coca-Cola's winter ad campaigns. So they would famously feature a warm grandfatherly Santa-looking person in a red and white suit. Coke and Christmas are still very closely aligned today. You'll see that Coke famously this year did their AI advertising campaign, but it was about Christmas. They are very much entrenched with Christmas. But I think what's interesting to me is that the reason that Coca-Cola originally got involved in Christmas is that they had poor winter sales at the time, and they needed something that could boost sales at that time of year. And it's interesting that Santa Claus, or as we know him today, the standardized version of the chubby big man with the beard, a lot of that's owed to Coca-Cola's campaign. So what was interesting at the time is that Santa, or the idea of Santa Claus, wasn't necessarily standardized. His appearance wasn't standardized. He didn't always look like the Santa that we all recognize today. He'd have various different body shapes and various other features that were different in different media. He could be tall, short, human, less human, dressed in colors from blue to green. But Coca-Cola did commission an artist called Haddon Sundblom at the time, who created a series of Santa advertisements for their drinks. And he drew Santa as a jolly, plump, sort of grandfatherly man in a red suit with white fur trim, of course enjoying a bottle of Coca-Cola, as Santa does. And those ads have run for decades. They ran all the way into the 1960s each Christmas. So we can say that Coca-Cola helped shape the image of Santa Claus that we know and we recognize today. They effectively branded Santa in its own red and white color scheme. So they do have that crossover. They've got the red and white, and so does Santa, to the point where people would maybe assume that Santa always wore red. He appeared in red in earlier works, and he didn't appear red everywhere. That's just been the standardization that I would argue Coke pushed or created. Now, because Christmas doesn't belong to anyone, what is interesting about this to me is that you could argue that Christmas needed a style guide, and no one's going to do it because no one owns it. Who's going to do that? Well, Coca-Cola effectively did that in a lot of ways. Coca-Cola needed a cultural tailwind. Like, what is it that they can do that does boost those winter sales? And it was incredibly effective. Their winter sales did increase dramatically to the point where they were able to eliminate their winter season slump. By one account that I found, like within a few years, winter sales of Coke did match those in the summer. They were so successful. And that is quite extraordinary for a cold drink in cold weather, bearing in mind that this is Northern Hemisphere focused at the moment. That's why at that time of year it's cold. So Coca-Cola became not just a drink, but it became part of the holiday experience. This is all from Coke's point of view and like how they're getting a commercial benefit from it. But you could argue they actually added value to Christmas as well. So at that time in history, in the 1930s, there was the Great Depression. So having a joyful image and a joyful celebration provided the warmth and pleasures to people during a time of extreme economic hardship. Standardizing things did enhance sociability. So it makes neighbors feel, let's say, more cohesive and sociable. If your festive decoration, so your red and white Santa, for example, is standardized, it's more accessible for everyone to be social. It did introduce a concept of the holiday as a time for a necessary break and simple indulgence. Again, going back to perhaps even tapping the brand DNA of Christmas. And the world needed it as a valuable mental shift for a workforce struggling through economic crisis. They made Christmas more accessible. So you didn't need to be religious. You didn't need historical knowledge. So there was urbanization going on as well, the industrial age being very well in full flight at this time. Life is following clocks, shifts, production schedules, flattening time effectively and erasing natural pauses. So this was a pause that society needed, you'd argue, a time that everyone can access and everyone can come together. At a time where people will be becoming more mobile as well, so moving away from villages or churches or extended families, lifelong neighbours, that type of thing, where there was so many ingrained systems that silently taught norms, identity, ritual. Meaning that used to be absorbed by proximity, cities removed that transmission mechanism. So while Coke commercially benefited greatly from Christmas, I think it's important to note the cultural significance of making Christmas accessible, making it a time to pause when it was desperately needed, a time to increase social cohesion when it was desperately needed, a time to effectively celebrate and have fun when it was desperately needed, a time of such uncertainty. This was needed. It wasn't that they just did a clever campaign. They helped give culture what it needed. They capitalized on existing equity. So Christmas had existing equity. Obviously, it's been around for a long, long time at this point. But they made it accessible. They made it cohesive. They standardized it. And I think that's more important to look at than it is the actual drawings and the actual creative of the campaigns, though no doubt are quite good. Embedding your brand in culture is never a bad thing. There were so many interesting things that happened during the 20th century. So because it was transcending its religious origins in many places, Japan being one of those examples where less than 1% of the population is Christian, well, especially today, Christmas is celebrated in Japan in a secular manner. Those cities are lit up with extravagant displays, and families order special Christmas cakes, and couples use Christmas Eve as a romantic occasion on the calendar. But what's so cool to note here is that in the 1970s, KFC did do a successful advertising campaign where they positioned a fried chicken meal as Japan's Christmas Eve tradition. That practice still continues on a massive scale each year. And it began in 1970 when Takeshi Okawara, the manager of the first KFC in Japan, he overheard foreigners in his store complaining about the lack of Christmas turkey. So that's how the story goes, which is so interesting that he's taken that and gone, okay, so there's demand for Christmas something at this time of year. There's not turkey. We sell chicken. So he started promoting a party barrel of fried chicken effectively as a festive alternative. Now, the corporate version and other versions do differ slightly. So another urban legend that you sometimes hear is that Okawara was asked by a local Catholic kindergarten to provide food and dress as Santa for their party. And he danced with a bucket of chicken, supposedly. And that inspired him to create the broader campaign. Whatever we say, Christmas in Japan, which is a secular holiday for the most part, is now synonymous with KFC. So it is estimated that about 3.6 million families eat KFC during the festive season, and with those sales accounting for roughly 1/3 of the company's annual Japanese revenue, which is starting to bring us close to the present day. So about 2000 Beyond Christmas is very much a global brand in the cultural sense, universally recognized with a consistent set of imagery. Even in the Southern Hemisphere, if there is winter imagery, we still recognize that as Christmas. Snowy landscapes, that type of thing, reindeer. Music, carols and pop songs are played in countless languages now. There's rituals that billions partake in or at least witness every year. So feasts, gift exchange, family gatherings. And for those who don't celebrate religiously, they often join secular activities. If we're looking at a testament to cultural saturation, one of the most famous carols, so Silent Night, has been translated into about 300 languages and dialects. So many cities and towns put up lights and ornaments in late November through to December, reinforcing Christmas. Retailers deck out their stores differently. So Myers are very much a retailer that does that in Australia. They have an entire Christmas section that you can go into. Characters or assets from folklore and media, everyone knows what they look like. So if we're talking about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer or figures like the Grinch from literature and film, the Grinch has even permeated culture and become an insult. So if you're being a Grinch, you're being negative and bringing people down. And even non-Christian cities like Dubai or Shanghai now host Christmas lights in shopping districts. So the site-based associations are extremely widespread. And it's probably reasonable to say that well over 2 billion people see Christmas decorations annually, whether in person, via media, making the visual brand of Christmas truly global. The specifics can differ by region, and they do differ by region, but the core imagery, so those lights, the evergreens, the festive colours, that is shared across cultures. If we're talking about sound, if Christmas had a soundtrack, it's one that a lot of the world can hum along to. So Christmas music, carols are omnipresent in December, and they do form a key auditory association. So like I mentioned before, classic religious carols like Silent Night or Joy to the World and Oh, Come All Ye Faithful. I'm sure you're listening to this and you know exactly how they sound. So they're sung in churches and concerts internationally. It's also secular Christmas songs that are prominent in retailers and on the radio and in households. The spillage of playing Christmas songs over this time is incredible. And I remember working at a supermarket when I was a teen, and one holiday season in particular, the same handful of Christmas carols played over and over again on the speakers. It gave me a headache over an 8-hour shift, but I probably won't forget them. But the scale of the association or the auditory association is enormous. In the US, let's say, one survey did find that 93% of people report hearing Christmas music in public places over the holidays. Similar figures do hold in Europe as well. And even those who don't celebrate, they can't avoid notice that the sound environment in public shifts each December. That's how ingrained Christmas is into the soundscape. Carols by Candlelight is something that we have in Australia, so that would take place on the 24th of December, and again, reinforcing the auditory profile of Christmas. That is a well-attended event, and it's also broadcast on commercial TV. I could talk about taste, smell, and touch as well, but I think you're getting the idea at this point. And the point is that by engaging all the senses, that the brand of Christmas is effectively a full immersive experience that reinforces itself annually, every year. And the thing is with this, that it's defended by culture and by people because it's wanted. People want an excuse to get together with family. If we didn't have Christmas, some families might not see each other for years, maybe decades. So it does have a very practical purpose. People are invested in protecting it, so it will get protected. Commercially, there's so much investment now in protecting Christmas, so it'll be protected, it'll be reinforced every year. That will continue to happen. The salience of Christmas will continue to compound. Retailers are going to make Christmas displays. There's going to be Christmas parties. There are people who put up decorations. You know, it's a cultural phenomenon to drive around and look at the displays in your hometown or in your city. It is an unconscious dart on the board of when you will see your family next. Anecdotally too, I didn't look at much evidence for this part, but it is also a reason. It's almost like a cultural reset to be nice to other people. So it has a positive sentiment. I remember a colleague of mine one year when I was working in a bar when I was young, he spilled red wine all over someone that he was serving. And the lady, I remember her saying to him that, oh, that's okay, it's Christmas. I mean, she just had red wine spilled over her white shirt, and just because of the time of year, it was okay. That's okay because it's Christmas. Almost like a behavioral reset where you do be nice to other people. And more broadly, why its resilience is interesting now is because as we see that the West moves to an asynchronous culture, it is probably needed more than ever. So rituals depend heavily on synchronicity. You need things to line up so that you can effectively get together and engage in such rituals. A lot of traditional Western rituals are declining. Shared common rituals are declining. So that might be the family dinner or the neighborhood get together. Saying the West is not losing rituals, but it is losing shared rituals as rituals become a lot more individualistic. They're not going to go away because they're a behavioral phenomenon. They're needed. But the shared rituals is what is declining. Cinema attendance is declining. So that would be something that you could do as a shared ritual, an excuse to get together. Yes, watch the movie, but also see people in person. It's a ritual. Watching your favorite TV show with the family or every night or once a week. I remember when I was a kid, we used to sit up with my whole family and watch Home and Away. Wouldn't be caught dead doing that now. And a lot of people just go to their rooms and watch their own show now with the advent of streaming. Town halls are declining. Church attendance is declining. The shared family meal is in decline. Marriage is in decline. Funerals, or not funerals, but funeral attendance is in decline. But there is more people in Western countries opting not to have funerals now. That one's not the case across the world, but in some regions, in a lot of places in the West, even funerals are in decline with people opting not to have them. So again, a time to bring people together in decline. Convenience, as we know, does atomize behavior, and brands have taken full advantage of that. Starbucks is the place you go for your individual morning coffee. Netflix is where you go to watch whatever you want, whenever you want, on demand. Social media is where you go to read whatever you want to read on demand instead of sitting around the news at 6 p.m. at night. Instead of going to the town hall, you just argue on social media about what your political ideas and ideology are. But despite all this, Christmas is still omnipresent. It has been resilient to the change to asynchronous culture. And you could argue that people are going to defend it harder because it's the last thing, one of the last few things that actually brings people together as shared rituals. So what it is that I take away from this is that Christmas over its history has effectively gone through a lot of brand refreshes. I say that we don't really create anything. Everything we need is already there. It's about seeing it, seeing the opportunity and attaching ourselves to it. And Coke is a perfect example of doing that. It's so strong, in my opinion, because it's a ritual system, not just a ritual. And that's what gives it its brand resilience. So it repeats, it reinforces itself, and it gets defended by people. It does compound its salience every year across every sense. So while most of us brands fight for a fleeting impression, Christmas hits all 5 senses, the full sensory stack, easily, and it doesn't even have to pay for it. Christmas is culturally embedded, not dependent on media spend. Media amplifies it, but doesn't create it. That cultural anchoring makes it, or any brand, anti-fragile. So if media disappeared tomorrow, my contention would be that Christmas would still effectively run itself. It's decentralized, so millions of people propagate it. Families, retailers, councils, churches, cafes, TV networks, they all contribute. Resilient brands are co-created, not necessarily tightly controlled. Throughout history, as we know, it's been banned. It's had offshoots, but it's still here. And Christmas has refreshed its meaning over time without losing its core. Elasticity without dilution, I would call that the hallmark of a long-living brand. If we talk about how Coke benefit, they didn't create Christmas. They attached themselves to an existing resilient system. So the idea here is finding a ritual, refreshing it, becoming part of it, adding value to it, and benefiting from it commercially. Brands don't need to invent meaning. They need to plug into it. It has built-in annual triggers, and that's something that we can look at as well, is that it's baked into the calendar where it will get refreshed every year and the salience will compound every year. What are some calendar moments that your brand could attach itself to? None of us are going to build a brand as all-encompassing as Christmas in our lifetime. We probably all know that. But we can pay attention to what makes it so resilient, see where rituals in society are heading, and work out how we can do that for our own brands. Where's the compounding space around our brands if we look at culture, rituals, ritual systems, and the ability to transcend the senses? And the thing I'd say is that everything your brand needs is probably already there. You just need to work out how to join the dots, tap into culture, refresh something, attach yourself to something, add value to something that's needed, like Coke did in 1931. The world needed positivity. It needed a shared ritual. They didn't invent Christmas, but they augmented Christmas. They gave it what it needed to be able to thrive in that economic environment. Thank you so much for listening in. I really enjoyed researching this episode. I've got one more episode to go for the year, so I'll be back in your ears next week. If you're listening to this on the 23rd of December or the 24th of December or even the 25th of December, I hope you have a great Christmas. Talk soon. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Push Podcast. Please remember to subscribe, and if you are enjoying the episodes, please leave a review of the podcast on your platform of choice. It really helps to build the podcast credibility and to help others find this type of information.